Hey there, athletes. Coach John Ferry here with Team Wilpers. Very excited to welcome you to the Week 1 athlete briefing for the first Team Wilpers Half Marathon Run Challenge. We're very excited to have you here and that you're participating in what is our first distance-themed challenge thus far. So what is the goal of this particular challenge? Very simple. We want you to run a great half marathon about 10 weeks from now. Just so happens to be the weekend of in and around March 18th to 19th, which just so happens to be by complete coincidence the weekend of the New York City Half Marathon, the Rock and Roll DC Half Marathon, the Shamrock Half Marathon in Virginia Beach, plus about another 50 or more domestic half marathons that in that one weekend alone. Not to mention international. If you feel like you need to take a trip abroad in order to run, then you don't let me stop you. And then simply, if you want to run exactly where you are, that is 1000% okay and very awesome as well. So welcome, welcome, welcome. We're very excited to have you here. So the plan, plenty of questions about the overarching range of the plan. So the things you clearly know is that it's a 10-week plan ending at around that weekend. Plenty of questions about how to tweak that, and we'll talk it a little bit. We'll talk more and more about it as we continue throughout the weeks of what happens if you're a little bit sooner or a little bit later. But overall, 10-week plan. Our midweek workouts, as you can see thus far, is going to start around that half an hour mark, and we're going to move to a maximum of about 60 minutes for those midweek workouts. A little bit faster runners will have a little bit longer distance. A little bit less fast runners will have a little bit less distance. That's just how time-based workouts work. Long run progression. So we're starting at this 4 to 6 mile range. And we'll talk a little bit more about that range in a second. Our maximum long runs will end up around the 10 to 12 mile range. Very similar to now, kind of based upon your experience running long distances, which would be very important, but also how things are feeling during the process. Things happen, tweaks happen, illnesses happen, etc. So that range, although this time we broke it into kind of a beginner, intermediate, advanced, it can work for all levels on all weeks as well. There are just some times you're going to feel better than others. Things are going great, things are going not so great. Just know that each week that range is baked in, and that's what we do with our kind of one-on-one coaching athletes as well, is provide a little bit of flexibility because not everything has to be quite so rigid. So utilize the range. The energy zones. So there are going to be two main energy zones that we focus on as part of the half marathon challenge. We're going to be focusing on aerobic, aka endurance, aka easy pace. So we're talking about an RPE around 2 or 3. It should look easy, feel easy, and be easy for those workouts. So that's kind of our first. And our second is actually going to be sub-threshold. So it's sort of a variation on a range, if you will. For people who've been around a little bit, we've done a lot of threshold work, talked a lot about threshold. So this sub-threshold is going to be where our half marathon pace is, or is for a lot of athletes, marathon pace, things of that nature. They're paces, they are race paces that are based at a high percentage of threshold, but not quite there. So they're technically still in an aerobic zone, but they're getting awfully, awfully close. We're going to work on that because we're here to run a half marathon. And the half marathon itself is run 99 and change percent aerobically. So we certainly want to bolster that aerobic system, build that big aerobic engine, because this is an endurance event. So a little housekeeping here. So the website, which I assume many of you have made it onto, I think everyone probably has made it onto somehow. So there are a few things that are going to be there. It's going to be your paces. It's going to be your workouts for each week. And then maybe most importantly, it's going to be your box to check off that you have done the workout. So the best chance for success over the scope of this training plan and every training plan is consistency. And one of the greatest ways to achieve that consistency is to go in, be accountable to yourself, check that box. A 100% completion percentage would be an incredible thing to strive for over the course of this challenge. If you have a 100% completion percentage from week 1 to week 10, you have really set yourself up for success. So go in, check that box, be accountable. We're going to do kind of that old school teacher thing now, that everyone has 100% to begin with, and it's yours to lose. So you have 100% right now, and you got to keep it all the way to the end. Paces on the website. So all of the paces are based on the result of your 20-minute distance test. So we'll talk about this a little bit more. Some questions came out there. What you do with the result of that 20-minute distance test is you go into the profile and settings section of the website. You enter your result in distance, in miles. Sorry for everyone who works in kilometers. We don't have that one quite tweaked yet, but enter the result in miles, and that will dictate your paces, also a minute per mile. Once again, apologies to the kilometer folks out there. One day. For this challenge, because there will be 6 pace zones that are generated, or 6 pace targets, excuse me. For this challenge, we'll be mostly operating in between easy and threshold. So those top 2 pace zones, VO2 max and anaerobic capacity, you can check them out, but they're going to be for another day for the most part here. So now for the week 1 workout. So 20-minute distance test. So if you've participated in challenges with us in the past, or you participated in the holiday challenge, you're coming off of a 20-minute distance test already. So a few things for newcomers or people who are thinking about doing it again. So yes, it is as far as you can run in 20 minutes. Yes, it is a max effort. Yes, your pace zones will be negatively affected if you hold back on that test. And yes, I know that long distance runners don't like running fast over short distance tests. Sorry about it. This workout can be done indoors, it can be done outdoors, it can be done on a track, it can be done on a road. This is your baseline test. Do it the way that you feel most connected to your training. I have an athlete in Winnipeg. He told me it's actually negative 40 degrees there during the day, so he's not doing any outdoor training right now. It would make sense for him to test on his treadmill because he's going to be using that for almost 100% of his workouts. If you're mixing it back and forth, I always prefer the test to be done outside. Because you know why? The races are run outside. But do the thing that works best for you. It can be done always. Why performance testing? I think this is very important. It kind of goes back to me picking on the endurance runners, the long distance runners like myself, which is, it is simply the best way to get a gauge of current fitness and accurate pacing zones as of today. So it takes into account running efficiency, but it also takes into account determination, mental toughness, and finally pace, which is what we're moving towards. The important thing about doing these performance tests is it allows us to meet you exactly where you are today, not a month ago or a year ago, a decade ago, even a couple weeks ago. You know, a lot can happen sometimes in a couple weeks. I had to do this for myself fairly recently, and I made a big adjustment coming into my training year this year and actually regressed my training paces quite a bit based upon some of the training that I had and had not been doing for various factors. So it happens as part of the long-term life cycle of an athlete. It's not a constant progression upwards. It's peaks and valleys, peaks and valleys. So the performance test allows us to meet you exactly where you are as of today and set targets as of right now. And those might not be targets that you're running at a month, months from now, even a month from now, even a few weeks from now. As you start to get in, you start to build fitness, you start to build endurance, those paces might start to feel a little bit easier. And you might be able to go a little bit faster, or potentially even retest, throw another test in for yourself and see if you can advance on what you did last time around. Because performance testing is a great way to, once again, measure exactly where we are as of today. So prep for the test. So we're not going to get deep into strategy because this is week 1. So baseline testing, we don't do so much. For people who've been around a while, we start to talk about it a lot more at kind of the end of challenges. At the end of this challenge, it's a half marathon, so we're not going to talk about it. So baseline tests. Here's the things the little bit of advice I will give as a prep is 1, rest up and give yourself a good shot at success. Don't try to cram this thing in on a lunch break. Don't try to wake up and get out the door in the next 15 minutes and do this. You have to kind of set it up like it's a race. Make sure you're up or awake have mobilized, have warmed up, etc., because you're going to be running very hard right from the start for 20 minutes. Don't overthink it, however. It doesn't have to be super complicated. You get warmed up, you go out, you pick your own starting line, you click start, you run as far as you can for 20 minutes, stop or no stop, whatever. You run as far as you can for 20 minutes, the end, period. That's how the test is done. No holding back. As I mentioned before, your training paces are directly based on the result of this test. So it's important that you give a nice hard effort, you really give it all you have so that you can, for the next 2.5 months, be working off accurate training paces that reflect your actual fitness. And as I mentioned, no strategy for week 1. It's just simply show up, hopefully have some fun with it, set yourself up for success, and we'll see how things shake out. 20-minute distance test. Option B, for those who have tested within the last 2 weeks. So it doesn't mean winter challenge, it definitely doesn't mean spring or summer challenges several months ago. It means if you tested within the last 2 weeks at the end of the holiday challenge and felt great about your test, then there'll be an option B, which is to run the progression run. The progression run has 2 goals. One is to get faster from start to finish. You want to start very easy. You want to go faster, 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 faster. And for at least 1 minute, I want you to get to your threshold pace right there at the end. And I actually want you to allow a 5-minute cool down within the workouts. It's actually kind of a 25-minute progression run, 5-minute cool down, but not as good a title. But to circle back one more time. So if you've tested within 2 weeks and we're happy with your test result, you get to do the 30-minute progression run. Otherwise, distance test time. Run number 2, run for everybody. 30-minute half marathon pace interval run. So if you've been around a little bit, this run is going to be very similar pace to your threshold runs. Once again, if you've been around, you know I talk a lot about threshold in the past, about how it's long periods of work, short periods of recovery. So you might notice there's some pretty darn generous recovery here for 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off, 5 minutes on again. We're talking about 10 minutes of total time at half marathon pace. So why is that? 1, a lot of people are coming right off their distance test. I expect a little bit of fatigue. 2, one of the best things that can come from this workout is we start to genuinely practice the race pace, or the pace in and around the race pace that you'll be running on half marathon pace day. So we want to, over the course of 10 weeks, come back to this and back to this and back to this and back to this, so that by the time we get to race day, this is a pace that's very comfortable in your body to run for as long as you feel like you want to run this race pace. But this week, here in week 1, we're just going to touch on it quickly the first time. Naturally, as weeks go by, we're going to extend the distance here, extend the time here, and hopefully by the time, once again, we get to race day, feeling very, very comfortable and confident with this race pace. So a little bit of a warning, my little shady side eye to indoor-only runners, is that in order to feel this pace and get this thing into your body, from time to time, you're going to have to take it outdoors and run on the road, because once again, I think I threw it out already, that's where the races are. So it's a different feel to be able to punch in a number and hold that pace than having to kind of get out blind, know the feel of it, know what your energy level is like. So not that you can't use it. Treadmill, great tool to have, especially here in the middle of the winter. But from time to time, take these especially race pace workouts outdoors so you can start getting really comfortable and confident once again for your actual race day. It's going to make a huge difference. Moving into our long run of the week. So week 1, 4 to 6 miles, plenty of questions about the range of miles. So the range of miles, maybe even a little bit more than beginner, intermediate, advanced. I'm not sure that quite summed it up in the way we were hoping for. Has a lot more to do with your recent training history and kind of long-term training history. If you're someone that is consistently right now running 6 miles or more, etc., then obviously start at the high end of that range. Maybe even stay where you are if you're already higher in that range. If you're someone that the longest run you've done recently is 30 minutes, You want to start at the low end of that range. Jumping from that straight to 6 miles probably doesn't make a lot of sense. So the range itself is provided so that you've got a little bit of flexibility in there and not so rigid. Not all of us are the same. As a matter of fact, if I made a training plan for myself and some similar athletes just like myself, we would probably have very different long run progressions. There's going to be some days I feel better or worse, and there are going to be some days they feel better or worse. They might be able to handle more volume than I'm feeling like I can at the moment. So this range is there on purpose, but as a starting point, you want to choose the distance that feels most comfortable. So don't feel like you need to go to the furthest stretch goal. Similarly, don't feel like you need to drop all the way back because your mileage is too high. You want to find yourself somewhere in the middle there. And if we get there and you're feeling comfortable and confident, that's great. And I touched on earlier about this easy pace, or in terms of the endurance zone, the aerobic zone. But for these workouts, especially right now, this might not always be the case. We want these things to be easy, easy, easy peasy. Those should be, once again, RPE level 2 to 3, something highly, highly manageable. So you want to walk away from the end of the workout feeling like you had a lot more to give. Even when we get to miles 10 and beyond, that's the goal, to walk away from these workouts. Just keep that in mind. Keep that in your back pocket there. So that is our long run progression for now. Week 1, little photo challenge. So a little bit of fun thrown into the mix before I get into the Facebook questions that came up here. So the week 1 challenge, in it to win it. Share a photo or story about how you plan to crush your 2023 race goals. We'll pick our favorite and send a little TW swag your way. We've had a blast looking through these things over the past couple challenges. Please keep coming. It has been a great pleasure to kind of check these things out. Make sure to tag at Team Wilpers and at Team Wilpers Run Challenge to participate. On to the Facebook questions, which there were a lot. So I tried to fold some into the kind of the body of this, and I will certainly try to hit as many as I can right now without completely boring everyone to tears. So I'll do my best, and we'll get you out of here pretty soon as well. So questions that came up. The first one, I picked the 3 run. Usually I add in cross training with strength, yoga, cycling, etc. Are there specific days that you recommend adding those in to avoid certain types or avoiding certain types of days? Apologies. And so I want to backtrack this a little bit and say, like, let's take a look at a training week. And so the first thing I want to do when I break down a training week is I want to make priority A, B, C, D, etc. workouts. And so for you, looking at your theoretical training week, we'll go ahead and just say all our runs are priority A. Stands to reason, we're all here to run a half marathon. So everything else drops down a tier. That's kind of our priority, kind of B and below. And so for each individual athlete, you have to kind of take a look at your interest and your year and figure out then what's your second priority. So once again, across the scope of the whole training week, very, very, very rarely, almost never, do I assign more than 3 key workouts to the week. So in this challenge already, we have 3 key workouts to the week. We've got our 2 key midweek runs and our long runs. That's we call a 3Q week. So when I'm looking to add on to that, what I'm looking to add on to is supplemental work. So in order of the kind of the things you brought up in this question, if I were looking to supplement my run training with cycling, I'd probably be cycling on non-running days, or either as second workouts, like kind of a brick style workout later in the day, or a reverse brick style workout later in the day, and doing kind of low intensity aerobic and endurance style cycling. So kind of, if you're used to power zones like zone 2 and 3, mostly zone 2 supplemental work, that's the thing you want to use to help improve your running performance, is do endurance work on the bike. I am far from a yogi. However, similarly with yoga, you want to do things that are a little bit more low-key, things that want to keep your heart rate down. So the strength component and the balance component of yoga is amazing. What we don't want is something that's having your heart rate skyrocket because this is supposed to be a non-peak training day. So something a little bit supplemental. Strength work. So this is a little bit different scenario, and I wanted, inevitably this question will come up many times over the scope of the next 10 weeks, but I thought I would touch on it here in week 1, and then we'll, revert back to it over the course of time. So the quick rule of thumb is that I tend to do strength training on my non-running days. This doesn't always work out schedule-wise, especially for multi-sport athletes. My second favorite option of strength is to do strength training on the same day as your key run workouts, but a few hours later. So if you're doing that key run first thing in the morning, either late afternoon, early evening, come back, do that kind of key strength workout. That would be kind of my option B. I thought I would talk about some of the principles of strength training that we're looking for, especially it makes a big difference even with scheduling. And those are heavy weight, low repetition, lots of rest, and making sure this does not become a cardiovascular event. We start seeing things of high rep, tons, low weight, very high cardiovascular output. That is a very different thing than what we're looking for from strength training for runners. Becomes a key workout of the week, and that's not what we want. We want your key workouts to stay your run workouts. If you find that strength training makes you too sore to run at a high level the day after, or sometimes for people it's even 2 days after, that is something you have to account for yourself and figure out how to position them in the week in a way that peak soreness doesn't land on your key workout day or your key long run day. So typically what that means is either moving it to the second session of the day, or if you're a 2 day later person, just placing it right in between those 2 key workouts early in the week tends to be a perfect spot for that strength training session. All right, next question. Sorry, I lost for a second there. So question 2 was, I had a half marathon pace. Let me redo that one. I have my half marathon pace, but I want to target a 2-hour half marathon, which is slightly faster. Should I push my half marathon pace to meet that goal? This is a tricky one because I do not have the information about what the pace is and we have the goal pace, but we don't have the test pace. So it depends on a few things. It depends on how big the gap is. If we're looking at a few seconds, absolutely. If we're looking at 30 seconds as a minute, probably not. Why? Because in doing so, we're very, very, very likely to overshoot our training zones. When we talk about sub-threshold workouts, we want to stay aerobic. We want to build that big aerobic engine. If all of a sudden you're operating significantly higher than that level, there are a few things that are going to happen. 1, we're not training aerobically anymore. We're training in a totally different energy zone. 2, you're going to have excessive fatigue because that's a much more difficult energy zone to train. It's designed for shorter duration intervals, and we're going to be doing very long duration intervals. So while it's okay to adjust that a little bit, you don't want to take it too far just for the sake of a goal. You might want to adjust it over the scope of training. If you started at 1 and you started working and working and working as it started to feel more comfortable, you could definitely make little minor adjustments as you go along to get closer and closer to that pace, because the goal is certainly not to be at peak shape right now. The goal is really to be at peak shape 9 weeks from now or 10 weeks from now when you go to run that race. So be careful with it. It might be worth starting where you are right now and seeing how things feel, see how the workouts shake out, and then a couple weeks down the road, making a slight progression, then making a slight progression as training advances. So just be careful with that tweak. If you feel like, however, that your pace does not accurately reflect your ability, then we might have to re-examine the test. As I've said several times now, the paces are directly related to the test results. So if something didn't go well in the test, or you didn't feel good about the test, if you maybe didn't run quite hard enough in the test, then naturally the rest of the paces are going to reflect a little bit slower than maybe they could have. If those are factors, if you feel like there might have been an issue with the test, there are kind of 2 things that I would do. 1, I might consider a retest within the next week or 2 of kind of gauging your training zones based on some of the RPE we talked about, and retesting when you're feeling a little bit better. The thing, and I don't even love to bring it up because of all the wonderful things I talked about performance testing and why we did it, but if you have a very recent race result and know exactly the half marathon pace you're going for and are pretty confident it's your pace, you could make a tweak just to get there. It would be not the way I'd recommend it. I would always recommend the performance test route, but it can be done. On the flip side of that, there are plenty of people that thought the half marathon pace was too fast, which is also pretty reasonable. So you may or may not have seen, if you like kind of take your cursor on the website and hold it over half marathon pace, someone wrote this wonderful definition of what we meant. And that definition was half marathon pace is the pace you can complete 13.1 miles under ideal race conditions when fully trained. So this is a training pace that is not necessarily the pace you would pick for racing in all conditions. So a few factors go in there, right? Training factors. How comfortable are you with the distance? Probably the biggest thing when we start to get to distances of this nature, half marathon and marathon, is the 13.1 miles of a major challenge? Is the distance itself? For most people it is. If that's the case, it's awfully hard to look at it and say, well, like now I want to run to my max potential for 13.1 miles. You have to worry about the distance itself. So you're going to need to reduce the pace a little bit more towards easy. It's probably somewhere in between the fast end of your easy and the actual half marathon pace. On the flip side, if you're someone who runs 20 miles per weekend on a single run and the distance is no challenge at all, you really have an opportunity to focus on pace and pace in particular. So it kind of comes down to how comfortable you are with the distance there. Then there are environmental factors. That's kind of phase B, where there are hills, temperature, wind, fatigue, illness, injury, etc. And a combination of all those things, right? It's like you're usually dealing with a few of those for every race. So having a goal pace and a pace that you're training at is not necessarily the thing that you show up for. Actually, we'll use New York City Marathon this year as an amazing example. One, it's a fairly challenging marathon course as marathons go. There are plenty of hills and bridges, things to account for there. Two, and I apologize for anyone who ran it this year, the conditions were brutal, very warm, very humid. Combine that with the difficult pace. If you were coming in with a goal marathon pace, you were going to have to drop significantly back from that in order to have a successful race day. So all of us are usually dealing with some of those aspects. It's very rare you show up in perfect conditions and you can go and like run that perfect race at perfect pace. Sometimes it's worth trying, but that is what we're looking at half marathon pace, is the pace with if you're fully trained and feeling great and the conditions were perfectly ideal, what we would want to go at. So use it as a training pace. Use it as kind of something to strive for, but don't feel like it is the only pace that you would go and run a race with. Well, ladies and gents, that is all for week one. Thank you so much for being here. Have an incredible start to this challenge. We cannot wait to do this together. We'll see you back here next week for week two.